Andy Burnham, the former Health Secretary, standing down from Parliament, and he, speaking in the House of Commons yesterday, revealed that he believed there had been what he called a criminal cover-up on an industrial scale that took place over the use of NHS-contaminated blood products during the 1970s and the 1980s. More than 2,000 deaths were linked to the scandal, in which haemophiliacs and others needing blood transfusions were infected with both hepatitis C and HIV and later died. The Labour MP said that the victims were guinea pigs. Now, the Health Minister, answering questions in the Commons yesterday, Nicola Blackwood, resisted calls for a fresh inquiry. He said, however, though he wanted there to be inquiry in the like of the Hillsborough inquiry into that, and if there was not a government inquiry, he would take the issue to the police. Let's talk now to Liz Carroll. She's Chief Executive of the Haemophilia Society and joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Liz.
Good afternoon.
This is incredibly serious stuff. Now, we must bear in mind there are obviously various elections that are going ahead, and we don't want to get into that, but this was the last statement made by Andy Burnham standing down from Westminster. Now, I suppose some would say if he'd been Health Secretary and he became aware of this information, he should have done something about it himself. But how true is what he's saying, according to the information you have at the Haemophilia Society?
We're certainly aware that information that was known by governments, pharmaceutical companies and some doctors wasn't shared with their patients. So the risks of the treatment, this revolutionary new treatment that was to change people's lives, the risks that were beginning to emerge and that were known from around the world were not shared with the patients.
Explain what this new treatment was and why it was so risky.
So before the 1970s and 80s, if you had haemophilia, the treatment that you had wasn't very effective. You had either blood donations or something called cryoparticipate, which is a type, an element of your blood that happens. So if you give a blood transfusion, this is spun off and you get this, and it replaces the protein that is missing in your blood. So until this point, that's what people had, and it worked, but not brilliantly. Then there was this revolutionary new treatment that was able to extract from thousands of people's blood donations the protein that was required to be replaced for people with bleeding disorders. And so
is this a clotting agent, factor 8?
It is. Right. It's factor 8 or factor 9. So it's the protein that's missing. So what happened was suddenly they're taking maybe 10, 20, 30, 40,000 people's blood donations, extracting the bit they needed and putting it into one treatment. So each treatment contained many thousands of people's blood donation. And this meant that you were getting exactly what you needed in the dose you needed. And so the bleeding that you were experiencing in your joints and muscles stopped, which hadn't happened before. It was life-changing. But unfortunately, this led to many, many people being infected with HIV and hepatitis
And that was
C.
because, I mean, a lot of this, I believe, came from, these blood products came from America, where people were being paid for the donating blood, and often it were drug addicts, people were sharing needles, prostitutes, a lot of people, homeless people. I mean, again, and basically high-risk groups were donating their blood. And was it being screened or not? Did people not care? Did people not realise that this was high risk?
In the very, very early days, HIV wasn't known about, but hepatitis was. And right back in the early 70s, it was recognised that blood taken from high-risk donors had a higher chance of having hepatitis in it. And so that knowledge was not translated into any other viruses that might come along. And so there was knowledge that it was a high-risk procedure to use high-risk donors for this treatment.
And they carried on doing it. Now, how many? We know 7,500 patients in total were infected by imported blood products. How many people, what percentage of that is the people who were given these imported blood products? So
everybody who had treatment for haemophilia at that time, so over 4,500 people, were infected.
Yeah.
So if you had treatment for haemophilia, you 100% would have got hepatitis. Many also got HIV, and the vast majority of those have already died.
And again, that was at a time when HIV was basically a death sentence.
Absolutely, it was.
It is true. So what's come out now is that it wasn't sort of like they did this, they just didn't realise, no one realised they weren't being tested, and as soon as they realised, they dealt with it. No, what actually happened was that they realised it was widely known within the medical professions or all the organisations that were involved in this. It was widely known, including at the top levels at the NHS, that there was this problem, that people could possibly die and then did die as a result of this treatment. And this was covered up. I mean, this is an extraordinary scandal.
It is extraordinary, and it's hard to believe that actually people don't know about this in the way that they should. And those decisions were made, and we don't know why those decisions were made, and that's one of the reasons that we are calling, and Andy Burnham is calling, for an inquiry. Because some inquiries have taken place already, but none of them had the power to compel witnesses from the Department of Health to give evidence. And so we don't know how those decisions were made, why they were made. We don't know the truth. We also know that many of our members tell us that their medical records are missing or have been changed. And so their test results for them being tested for HIV or hepatitis, they were tested without their knowledge. Their results were known and recorded in their notes, but they were not told until much later.
When they could have perhaps received some sort of treatment that might have...
It may have been treatment, but it may also have been the fact that, of course, some people then went on to infect their partners. Because they didn't know that they themselves were at risk of this infection.
There have been payments, haven't there? Some compensation payments. Well, okay, frankly, I've got to be honest with you. You know, if you lose your life, or your partner's lost their life, or your parents at a young age because of this, compensation, frankly, who cares? That's not what people are looking for. Do you expect that we will see something? I mean, this doesn't sound to me like inquiry territory. This does sound like, to me, it's criminal acts.
I mean, there's two things. At this point, there's been no proper compensation. What there have been is some payments from government called ex gratia payments, which are some support, but many of this community are still living in absolute poverty.
Yeah, but we were looking at a few grand a year. I mean, this is nothing.
And, you know, if your whole life has been affected, even if you haven't died from it, but you are still living with major illnesses, you haven't been able to work, you may not have been able to be at school because you were infected very young, your family have given up their jobs to care for you. It has a huge financial and emotional impact on a family. Proper compensation levels are needed for this community, and that has never happened.
It also seems to me that people need, if people were aware of this and did nothing about it. Now, we understand in America where an awful, healthcare, this is all profit motivated, but it's not in the NHS. It's not supposed to be done like this. The moment someone flagged up, hold on a minute, this blood is all contaminated, we're not saving lives, we're actually killing people. The moment that was first flagged, this should have been stopped immediately.
And that's certainly something we can't understand how that didn't happen. And one of the reasons we need an inquiry is to try and actually get to the truth. Because we don't know the whole truth at this point. And
we also, if we don't know the whole truth and we don't get people to answer and set up systems to make sure this could happen again.
And I think that's part of this, is to ensure that this never happens again to anybody. We know that there are good measures in place now to ensure that this sort of thing can't happen again. But until the whole truth about how decisions were made at that time comes out, the confidence may not be there. And I think that's really, really important.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for talking to us. Keep up the great work there. Liz Carroll, Chief Executive of the Haemophilia Society. I have no doubt at all we'll end up seeing some sort of inquiry or police investigation on that. Again, I'm amazed that this has taken so long to come out into public knowledge. Thank you very much for talking to us.